I'm a country boy. My name is Bill Carlson. I have a degree in animal husbandry, and all I wanted to do was own my own feed store and start a family. After I finished college, I married my high school sweetheart, Janice. We grew up together, and she was the only girl I could imagine living with. She was beautiful, brunette, and had a good body even after having 2 children. I was proud to have her as a wife and would do anything for her. Janice had a problem. She envied the socialites. She read the society pages of the newspaper and subscribed to all the magazines that talked about the beautiful people. When I went to the dentist, I read the car magazines and knew all the fancy cars. I knew all the designers and their clothing line. She wanted to be somebody above all else, and I wasn't able to provide that for her. I took a job in Omaha at a fancy yuppie feed store. This allowed us to be closer to the big city, and I could continue to work at what I loved. I liked my job and I was good at it. I could give customers special treatment, and the company rewarded my efforts by giving me flexible hours. Janice liked living in the city better than in the country and was happy for a while. When she decided to go to work, we had to start taking the kids to daycare, but they didn't seem to mind. Janice worked for a medical equipment company called Gilbert Medical. They manufactured syringes and other medical supplies. It was an office job, and she seemed to be happy because it allowed her to get dressed up and meet people who were not farmers. She worked hard and seemed to lose interest in our home life. I ended up taking care of the kids most of the time. I would drop them off at daycare and pick them up after work. I would feed them and usually get them ready for bed. I even did the cooking and ended up cleaning the house most of the time. I did the laundry, making sure all their clothes were perfectly ironed. We had been saving money every month so I could buy my own feed store. Now it seemed that even though she worked, we could no longer save anything. The daycare was taking some of the money, but most of it was going on trips to the beauty salon, nail salons, and expensive clothing stores. I had a hard time understanding how we could work 2 jobs and save less money. She refused to talk about it and would get very defensive and angry when I brought it up. After a while, I stopped bringing it up. However, I did open another savings account that I could keep separate. He started working overtime. She started having private calls. She became less attentive in bed. She wanted a new, fancier car. She even talked about getting breast implants. There was no doubt in my mind that my wife was having an affair. I may be a simple country boy, but I was no fool. At that point, I didn't even want to save the marriage. I just wanted to fix everything and move on before it was too late. It was hard to pinpoint anything, because I didn't relate to the people she worked with, but I was pretty sure that if anything happened, it was with someone at work. I worked with a couple of nice guys. They weren't very polite, but they worked hard. My job made me their boss, but I never played the boss card. It seemed like the work always got done without having to give them orders. Everyone knew what needed to be done, and we worked together. The guys appreciated it, and the relationship was good. Roy and Freddie were going to be valuable allies in my plan. I had noticed that on Wednesdays, Janice always wore fancy underwear and her best clothes. She seemed to take more time to get ready for work. I thought it would be a good time to start. I told the guys what was wrong with me, and they took care of my deliveries and appointments for the day. I parked next to the entrance to the Gilbert Medical Plant parking lot. It gave me a good opportunity to catch up on some technical reading I had overdue. Around 11 a.m., Janice came out and got into her car. It wasn't hard to follow her, and within minutes, she parked at the Holiday Inn. She parked at the west end of the parking lot, away from the office. A few minutes later, a guy pulled up in a red Corvette and parked at the east end of the parking lot. I didn't recognize the car, but when he got out, Janice got out of hers. They walked to an outside room on the second floor, number 117, and then went inside. He already had the key. My heart skipped a beat and I felt a little sick to my stomach. All I had done was confirm my suspicion. I had no idea what he was going to do next. I decided to quit and go back to work. I would take my time to plan the next step. Before leaving the parking lot, I got out of the truck and cut 2 of his valve stems with my baling wire cutters, one in the front and one in the back. I was a little pissed off. I don't know why I didn't cut some of his as well. The rest of the day went extremely slowly. I picked up the kids after work, went home and made dinner. When he came in, I asked him how his day had gone and he said fine. But he had a flat tire. One of the guys at work changed it for him. Nothing more was ever said about it. The next morning, I stopped by the factory after dropping the kids off at daycare. It didn't take me long to locate the red Corvette. As luck would have it, I had a reserved parking space with a sign. I wrote it down. Ken Beauchamp, distribution manager. Roy's wife also worked at Gilbert in the personnel department. That afternoon, I knew all about good old Ken. Most importantly, he was already married. He had received a reprimand for making sexual advances to one of the employees and was having some problems with his expense accounts. I got his address, phone number, cell phone number, and even his social security number. But I didn't know what I was going to do with this information. He had been married for 8 years, and his wife's name was Amy. We had a good day at work, and Roy, Freddie, and I had time to grab a beer before I had to pick up the kids. I still wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I was sure I would come up with something soon. I was trying to remain calm and logical in the face of the situation, but I was getting angrier every day. Occasionally, I would find myself crying silently. I was hurting and felt like I couldn't fix myself. Having to live with Janice was getting harder and harder. I just wanted it to be over. I had another lucky break the next day when I remembered that one of my best clients, Marge Gilbert, was the wife of the president of Gilbert Medical. I had never met him, but she and I got along very well. I was being especially nice to Marge, trying to find out if I could use our relationship to my advantage, when Marge's daughter Cindy arrived. Cindy was in her last year of veterinary school. Marge went to the barn to work, and Cindy and I talked for about an hour. I enjoyed my time with her and felt a little guilty after I left, but it passed quickly. That weekend, I spent some time in the garage welding. I took a small piece of flat steel and welded 4 sharp points to it. I made the tips with concrete nails, so they would be really hard and rigid. The plate was about 6 by 6, and it was going to be my first step in getting my revenge for harassment. I saw Marge again on Tuesday. He was a little depressed as he unloaded the order, not very cheerful. That got her attention. "Bill, what's wrong with you today? Why are you so sad?" "I'm having some personal problems, Marge. Sorry I'm not good company today. Let's go for coffee and you tell me about it." We went back to the house and sat in the kitchen. It looked like the inside of a restaurant. Everything was stainless steel and granite. It looked like a magazine. I thought to myself, Janice would love this. Marge put down her coffee and leaned forward and said, "Well? How can you help me, Marge?" "Well, I don't know unless you tell me the problem." I really didn't want to talk to her about it, but finally decided that maybe I could help. "My wife, Janice, works at Gilbert Medical, and I believe she's being coerced into having sex with one of her bosses, but I can't prove anything." "Why do you think this is happening?" "Little things mostly, but last week I found the two of them together at the Holiday Inn. My wife doesn't realize I know, and I don't know how to bring it up. I don't know if it's something she's being forced into or if it's something she wants to do. Our family life has deteriorated to the point where she doesn't seem to care about the kids or me. She seems to keep it a secret, and that's what really bothers me." "Who's the guy?" "I think his name is Ken Beauchamp. I don't know if Janice works for him or if they work in different parts of the plant. I've never met him. Do you want me to see if I can help?" I paused a little and lowered my head. "If you think something can be done discreetly, I'd love to try, but I don't want to make a big fuss." "Okay, let me look into it. I'll see you next Thursday with that oatmeal delivery." I thanked him, and as I got up to leave, I asked, "Where's Cindy?" "Back to school? He'll be home this weekend. Why don't you bring the kids over to meet them?" Wow, this turned out much better than I expected. I'm sure Janice will have no problem letting me take the boys on a field trip. It could be a nice weekend. The next morning, it was pouring rain. Janice went back to carefully dressing for her special day, and I said nothing as I watched her. After dropping the kids off at the day center, I stopped by work. The boys were ready to cover my morning shifts. Roy was going to use my truck, make my deliveries and log entries. I would initial all the entries when I got back to work. Freddie brought his cousin's van to work, and I loaded a floor jack in the back. We had attached my steel plate to the jack lift. We loaded all the trucks, and after they left for their deliveries, I went to the Holiday Inn. Just in time, Janice drove in and parked in the same spot as before. Ken arrived a few moments later and also parked in the same spot. When they entered the room, I gave them about 10 minutes to get settled. I pulled the jack out of the back of the van in the pouring rain and carried it over to Ken's car. I slid the jack under the engine block and lifted it up. It only took a few seconds before I heard the sound of nails piercing the oil pan. I lowered it and moved to the rear of the Corvette. A few seconds later, I heard the same pop in the fuel tank. Oil and gasoline were gushing out. I carried the jack back to the van. The whole thing took me less than a minute. I went down to Janice's car and recut 2 valve stems. By then, I was ready to go. I walked past Ken's car, pulled a lit cigarette out the window, and drove away. Out the rear window, I saw the flames shoot out, and a few seconds later, I heard the explosion as I left the parking lot. I was feeling better. Janice came home from work a little late. She had no dinner and went straight to bed. I played with the kids for a while, bathed them and tucked them in. That night, I slept on the couch. The next morning, Janice stayed in bed while I got the kids ready for daycare. We had breakfast and left. She didn't get up. She didn't say anything. I didn't ask her. Her car was not in the driveway. Around 9 a.m., After loading all the trucks, I received a visit from Police Lieutenant John Fritz. He was a nice enough guy. Tell me about your work schedule yesterday. Just normal deliveries, nothing special. Why? Can you account for your time around noon? I went to the office and took the previous day's delivery logs. I put them in front of him. Each stop had the location, the item delivered, the time of unloading, and my initials. He smiled and let out a little chuckle. That's a good log. Do you guys do that every day? Would you like to see last month's records? He shook his head and smiled again. I didn't know if I should feel good or bad. Do you want to tell me what this is about? He seemed reluctant to go into details, but finally came clean. There was a car damaged at the Holiday Inn in East Omaha yesterday, and we're trying to find out if anyone knew anything about it. Why me? Well, another car that was near the damaged one had two valve stems cut off. The car belonged to his wife. We wondered if it was a coincidence or not. First, I don't know what my wife's car was doing in the parking lot of the Holiday Inn. And second, what was her relationship to the wrecked car? The damaged car belonged to a partner with whom he worked. Apparently, they were having a working lunch with some of the company's clients at the hotel, and it all happened while they were having lunch. Did you talk to the people they had lunch with? No. They couldn't remember their names. Do you want to level with me, or are we going to play all morning? He leaned back in his chair and smiled. Do you know a guy named Ken Beauchamp? I never knew the man, and that's the plain truth. I believe you. He smiled again. I don't like to get in the middle of domestic disputes, and I hope I never have to see you again. Here's my card. Call me before anything else happens. Okay? He shook my hand. I'm sorry I had to bring this to your attention. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know. Okay. As he walked away, I said, Thank you, but you didn't really tell me anything. Put the pieces together. After work, when the kids and I arrived home, Janice's car was in the driveway. She was dressed casually and had dinner ready. She said she was not feeling well and had called in sick. She still didn't say anything about what had happened the day before, so I didn't bring it up. She went to bed early, and I went back to taking care of the kids and sleeping on the couch. The next day, I was already up, getting ready to go to work when I left with the children for daycare. After dropping them off, I went to the doctor's office and asked to be tested for STDs. Work was normal for a Friday. When I got home, Janice was there again. After dinner, I told her I was taking the kids to spend the next day at one of my clients' farms. I asked her if she wanted to accompany me, knowing full well that she would find a reason to refuse. He told me he had some shopping to do, and I didn't insist any further. I didn't care if it was a shopping trip or a date. The result was the same. Saturday, with Cindy and the boys at the Gilbert Ranch, was great. We spent the whole day having fun. Marge prepared a great lunch for everyone, and I didn't want it to end. Cindy loved the kids, and they seemed to really like her too. Mr. Gilbert wasn't there, so I hadn't gotten to meet him yet. Marge didn't say anything at all about our earlier conversation, and it didn't seem like Cindy had heard. I hated to go home, but in the end we had to. Janice didn't ask anything about our day. She didn't care. The boys tried several times to tell her everything they had done, but she wouldn't listen. Finally, they stopped trying. She asked me why I didn't sleep in bed anymore, and I explained that, due to work problems, I tossed and turned a lot and didn't want to disturb her sleep. That was the last thing he said about it. The following week was totally normal. I noticed that on her special day, she hadn't made any special preparations, so I assumed that the appointment for that day had been canceled. That was fine with me, because I had a lot of work to do. I went to see a divorce lawyer I had heard about, and she gave me brochures with lots of information. She had some blank forms to fill out that looked interesting. Everything went back to normal until the next Wednesday. She started by showering in the morning and then carefully combed her hair. She wore new, sexy black underwear and new perfume. They even looked like new shoes. I was careful not to let her see me looking and ran out with the boys. I was sure this was going to be a date day. After dropping the boys off, I drove by the plant and checked their parking space. A new Porsche Boxer was sitting in its slot. I jotted down the license plate and hurried back to work. The guys were as excited as I was about the newness. We rushed all the morning deliveries and went back to falsifying the registrations. I'm sure John Fritz figured it out, but we did it anyway. We had a long lunch off. Roy continued with the deliveries. Freddie stopped by the pool supply store and bought 2 large bottles of hydrochloric acid. I went to lunch with John Fritz. John looked at me funny when I walked into his office with pulled pork sandwiches, French fries, and a couple of Cokes. I greeted him and sat down across from him. He noticed something was up and grinned from ear to ear. I told him we could have lunch together and to update me on the car damage case. I had to figure out how to keep him busy for about 2 hours. It was going to be a long lunch. While I was trying to be pleasant, Freddie was in the Holiday Inn parking lot. He found the boxer and carefully poured acid all over the trunk, fenders, and hood. He cut the convertible top and poured acid all over the leather seats and floor mats. The dashboard also received a dose of acid. If that wasn't enough, he put a box of mothballs in the gas tank. The naphtha would do a nasty job on the engine if anyone started it. What acid was left, he spread over the tops of the tires. Before leaving, he cut the valve stems of Janice's car again. It was all over in 15 minutes. The only bad part was that I didn't know how long the two of them would be in the room. John and I chatted about frivolous things for a long time until he finally said, "What the hell are you doing?" "I just wanted to make sure I had a good alibi in case something happened to Ken Beauchamp's car today." "What's so special about today?" "The pork sandwich was on sale." I pulled out my cell phone and called the daycare. "Hi, Carol. This is Bill Carlson. I'm going to be tied up at work this afternoon, and I was hoping you could call Janice and ask her to come pick up the kids." "Thank you. I really appreciate it." "You can call her at 874-3211, extension 117. You may have to ask for her by name. Try to call as soon as possible to make sure you find her." "Thank you again." "Thanks again." John leaned back in his chair and chuckled. Those pork sandwiches were great. All was silent for a while, and finally John said, "Do you think I should call Mr. Beauchamp and ask him how his car is doing?" "Why would you want to do that?" "You wouldn't happen to know where I can reach him, would you?" I gave him her cell phone number and the number of room 117 at the Holiday Inn. "Pick one." John put the phone on speaker and called the hotel number. After a few rings, Ken Beauchamp answered, breathing heavily. "Hello, who is this?" "Mr. Beauchamp, this is Detective Fritz. I was calling to tell you that we still have no leads on who damaged your car." "Why are you calling here? How did you get this number?" "I'm a policeman, Mr. Beauchamp. Have you bought a new car yet?" "Yes, I did. Why do you ask?" "I just wanted to make sure there was no repeat of the last incident." "Is the car with you now?" "Yes, it's in the parking lot. Are you all right?" "Let me check." We could hear Ken muttering in the background as he checked the parking lot through the window. There was some squawking and a low moan. He went back to the phone. "Something doesn't look good. I'll have to get dressed and go check it out. I'll call you back." "Okay. But Mr. Beauchamp, why aren't you dressed now?" "It's none of your business. I have to go." They both hung up. John looked at me and smiled. "Happy?" "Of course. Look, I have to get back to work. If you have any questions, call me, okay? Maybe we'll have lunch again next week." "I hope not. This will have to end soon before someone gets hurt." I went back to work. Roy had the logs in perfect condition, and Freddie had thrown the acid bottles where they wouldn't be found. Tonight at home would be interesting. Janice had picked up the boys, but said nothing and went back to bed early. John came to see me the next day. He explained to me all the damage to the car and that Ken's insurance was outstanding since the Corvette incident. The car was totaled. It was over $60,000 short. Ken insisted that I had something to do with it, even after John told him that I was with him when it happened. Of course, John knew I had something to do with it, but he couldn't prove anything, and I don't think he wanted to. I don't know how Janice fixed her tires. I never asked and no one volunteered. Since Janice had never come clean about the situation, I decided it was time to end it all. My STD test went well. I had filled out the paperwork for the lawyer to start the divorce. I was thinking of going to the Gilbert Ranch this weekend with the boys, in case Cindy was there. If not, we would spend the day with Marge. The only loose end was that I still had no proof of extramarital sex. The weekend was good. Cindy was there. The kids were ecstatic, and we all had a great time again. We were like a family. I missed him very much, and so did the kids. Cindy still didn't know anything about what was going on, but at least she didn't ask. Before I left, Marge winked at me and told me everything would be fine. I was offered a new position about 100 miles away. It was for more money, a better job, and the option to buy the company in a few years. It was perfect. The only bad thing was that we wouldn't be near Cindy. The following Wednesday, Janice was back in costume. I don't know what car her boyfriend was using, but she was definitely getting ready for another visit with him. I assumed they would still be going to the same place. I was going to have to do something, but I hadn't really planned ahead. The boys and I were trying to figure out what to do when Marge Gilbert arrived. He motioned for me to come closer and told me to get in the car. He said nothing, just drove to the factory. He parked in the back, and we entered through a private door directly into Mr. Gilbert's office. Marge introduced us, and his secretary brought us coffee. We talked about frivolous things for a while, and finally I said, "Did you bring me here for some reason?" Mr. Gilbert laughed. "It's time to put an end to this show." Marge has informed me of what's going on, and I've done a little internal research. As soon as everything is in place, we'll get going. We should have all the information you need by the end of the day. If I do anything to embarrass you, Bill, I apologize in advance. It is not my intention to do anything to hurt you. We chatted some more to kill time, and Marge could see me smile as the conversation turned to Cindy. I was trying not to be noticed, but I didn't succeed. The phone rings and everyone sharpens their ears. What's up? Okay. Thanks for the call. You know what to do now, right? Mr. Gilbert smiled and said, Good. Everything is in place. We can get started. Ken and his wife are in their usual room at the Holiday Inn. Ken drove a company Benz to get there. That's against company policy, so they're bringing it back to the plant right now. Sorry to say, but I think your wife has a couple of flat tires, too. It seems to be some kind of tradition. He put the phone on speaker and dialed the room. Ken, this is Mr. Gilbert. I'm sorry to bother you, but I have a very important matter to discuss with you. Ken stammered a little. Yeah, okay. No problem. How did you get this number? Ken, that's not important, but what is important is that the legal department was notified of a possible sexual harassment situation. It's necessary for me to get correct answers here, Ken, so listen carefully. Are there any female company employees there with you now? There was a pause and a conversation in the background that we could not understand. Yes, sir, there is. Ken, is he there of his own free will or because of some coercion or threat on your part? No, sir, absolutely not, sir. There was no coercion of any kind. She is here of her own free will. I didn't force her into anything. Is the sex all consensual then? Yes, sir, absolutely. Everything is consensual. That's great, Ken. Thank you. That's all I needed to hear to clear up this mess. I really appreciate your honesty on this sensitive subject. We'll prepare a statement attesting to it and we'll be all set. Now I need to check with the lady as well. Will you pass it along to me, please? There was again a noise in the background that we couldn't make out. Finally, Janice got on the phone. Sir, how may I help you? Janice, did Mr. Beauchamp coerce or threaten you in any way to go there with him? No, sir. He did not threaten me in any way. That's good to hear. So the sex was consensual and you weren't intimidated in any way, is that correct? There was again a pause and a lot of murmuring. Janice came back on the line. Yes, sir, it was consensual. I'm glad to hear it. When you and Ken get back to the plant, we'll have the statements ready for you to sign. Can you put Ken back on, please? Sir. How did you know my name? Don't worry about it, Janice. It's not important. When Ken got back on the phone, Mr. Gilbert told him to come back to the plant so they could sign the papers in the legal department. He hung up the phone and smiled. Marge, why don't you take Bill out to lunch and come back in a couple of hours? The legal people should be done by then, and we can all go back to our normal lives. We had a great lunch. I had a hard time not getting emotional, but I couldn't thank him enough. In the end, he made me agree that we would never talk about it again, or what had been done. He also made me promise not to say anything to Cindy about it. That was a good sign. I told Marge about my new job offer, and she was happy for the kids and for me. After lunch, we returned to the plant, and I collected notarized copies of Ken and Janice's statements. They both swore that they had had consensual sex outside of their marriage. The jurists assured me that that was enough for my lawyer to close the divorce. Ken and Janice were dismissed. They packed their belongings before they arrived and were escorted out of the building. Unfortunately, neither of them had a car. Marge gave me her car and told me I could return it the next day. I dropped the papers off at the lawyer's house. She made me several copies of each. One set she was going to send to Ken's wife. I went to the bank and closed the accounts. I paid off all the credit cards and canceled them. I called the gas, water, electric, and phone companies and arranged to have the utilities shut off by Friday afternoon. I went to John Fritz and told him I had been good. He laughed. I notified the landlord that I would not be staying for the next month. I gave notice at work. They were happy for me, but not happy for me to leave. Freddie followed me to the Gilbert Ranch with my truck so I could return Marge's car. It was time to pick up the kids and go home. I dreaded walking through the door. Janice's car was not in the driveway. She was sitting on the couch crying when we arrived. It was the first time she had shown any emotion. There were 2 boxes of her personal things from work. I fed the kids and put the TV on. I stayed by her side to give her a chance to talk if she wanted to. You had to, didn't you? You had to ruin everything up in my life? Why the hell couldn't you mind your own business? You weren't justified in getting into mine? I was amazed. She kept looking at the whole situation as if everything revolved around her. She didn't care about the kids or me. She wasn't thinking about Ken's wife, Amy, our family, our life, and our plans meant nothing to her. Her only concern was what she was doing at that moment. Nothing else mattered to her. I was relieved that I didn't have to spend the rest of my life with her. I didn't say anything. I went upstairs and took a shower. Later, as I was getting the kids ready for bed, she came into the bedroom and closed the door. The next day, I took the boys to work. I made sure there were no loose ends and that Roy and Freddie could follow the system I had set up. We went to a few stores and picked up boxes for the move. I stopped by the Holiday Inn and Janice's car was gone, so I figured she would have had it repaired by now. Fixing the flat tires must have put a big dent in her shopping budget for the last month. Janice wasn't home when we arrived. We only had clothes and toys with us. I left everything else there for Janice to get rid of. Of course, she didn't know that the next day all services would be cut off. Damn, I was a son of a bitch. When we pulled out of the driveway, Janice was parking. She stood by her car and watched us drive down the street. I took the boys to Chuck E. Cheese, and we spent the night in a motel. The next morning, I took the children to daycare. I gave Carol cookies and treats and told her it was the children's last day and that I wanted them to enjoy it with their friends. Before I left, she took me aside. "What happened with your wife last week?" "I didn't want to ask you, but since you're leaving, I'm dying to know." She got very angry when I called her. She insisted on knowing where I got that number. And when I told her you gave it to me, she started swearing like a sailor. She didn't say anything when she picked them up, but I could tell she was very angry. "I'm sorry, Carol. I set you up." Janice was having an affair. She was at the Holiday Inn with her boyfriend, and I was hoping that if I had you call and interrupt her party, she'd think better of it. But it didn't work out. She ended up getting mad at both of you. I'm serving her divorce papers this afternoon, and the kids and I are leaving for a new job right after I pick them up. It was a low blow on my part, and I apologize for getting you involved. I went to see my divorce lawyer. I had it all worked out. I would keep the children and Janice would have visitation rights whenever she wanted. That was fine with me, because I didn't think she was interested in them. Everything else was split 50-50, but there wasn't much to talk about. There was no alimony, no child support, no cash settlements of any kind. I left her all the furniture, appliances, and fixtures. I really didn't want them. She kept her car. I didn't want it because it would get flat tires. All I had to do was give the papers to Janice. Unless she contested it, everything would be final in 3 months. A copy of Ken and Janice's notarized statement was attached to the divorce papers. A small side note made by the attorney indicated that the declarations would be kept private if all terms of the divorce were agreed upon. There were no questions. The car was in the driveway, so I was sure I was home. I sat in the driveway for a long time. I had loved Janice. She was the only girl I had ever been close to. I assumed our relationship was normal, and she hadn't even thought that I didn't provide what she wanted. She never let me know directly, and I was too dense to pick up on all the clues. I had failed her in many ways. What she did was deceitful on her part, but I felt it was partly due to my lack of attention. I knocked on the door of my house and felt weird. She opened the door for me. She looked tired. She asked me if I wanted a drink. I handed him the papers. He did not open them. He just looked at them and looked at me again. I looked at her and said, "Why?" I couldn't tell if she was angry or sad. After a few seconds, she finally came clean. "He smelled like aftershave. You smelled like manure." He wore Armani suits while you wore jeans. He ate lobster and steaks while you ate ribs and burgers. He had a London fog coat while you wore a Carhartt. He drove a nice luxury car while you drove a truck. He had manicured fingernails while yours were always dirty. He had a real job and you were still just a farm boy. Is that enough for you? I can go on all day if you want. I expected a life you couldn't give me. I'm sorry we got married, Bill. I married you for all the wrong reasons. I should have realized you wouldn't be willing or able to give me what I really wanted. I saw you as a means to get away from my parents, and I didn't think enough. I'm so sorry, but I can't change how I feel. I love my children, but I regret having them. I know it sounds terrible, but I don't seem to have maternal instincts. I was hoping that by finding someone who could fill the empty holes in my dreams, I would feel satisfied. But that only made me feel less satisfied with my current situation. I'm sorry I cheated on you. I'm sorry I was a bad mother to my children. I'm not sorry for chasing my dreams and looking for something better. What about your wife? What about your husband? What about your children? What about your family? Her demeanor seemed to change immediately. My questions infuriated her, and she no longer seemed to regret her actions. I don't give a shit about all that. It's my turn. I want to live the life I've always dreamed of. A farmer husband and two dirty-faced bratty kids don't help me get it. I got your goddamn papers. Now get out so I can get on with my life. Well, that made things easier. I turned around and left. When I picked up the boys, Carol told me to let her know if she needed me to make any more calls. I called the power companies and told them not to disconnect until the end of the month. I guess I was a little embarrassed. The divorce was final within 3 months. I never heard from Janice. The lawyer said everything went according to plan. My new job was great, but I missed the opportunity to buy the business. Someone else got it along with a quarter section of prime land attached to it. My boss said they were going to turn it into some kind of horse breeding farm. My job was safe, but my chance to have my own place suffered a setback. 2 weeks later, construction began next to the feed store. We were all trying to guess what was being built, and finally one of the boys asked the site engineer. It was a veterinary clinic for large animals. It sounded interesting, but I dismissed it as wishful thinking. They got the whole building up in less than 60 days. The new owner was to report on Saturday. The boys and I stopped by on our way to lunch. I was curious. Suddenly, the two boys started yelling, "Cindy! Cindy!" There she was, looking better than ever. Marge was with her. Cindy had graduated with a veterinary degree and wanted to raise show horses while running a large animal clinic. She was showing the kids around the new building while Marge and I talked. We all went to lunch together, and Cindy told us that she was also building a new house on the property so she could be close to her work. The boys and I were grinning from ear to ear all night on the way home. 5 years later, Cindy was raising beautiful horses. Her clinic was a success, and I had just opened my 6th feed store. The children had 2 little sisters whom they adored. My mother-in-law, Marge, and Mr. Gilbert came every weekend. I never knew what their first name was. Janice never came to visit the kids. Janice.